Welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with special guest, Randy Kritkausky, and he's here today to share with us his new book, Without Reservation, Awakening to Native American Spirituality and the Way of Our Ancestors. Now, have you ever been interested in learning about the deep connection with nature and our ancestral wisdom? Today's discussion is going to cover just that. Now, Randy is an enrolled tribal member and founder of Ecologia, which is an international environmental organization that works on the planet's most extreme challenges. He's also a former professor of Keystone College, researcher at Middlebury College, and scholar at the Central European University in Budapest and Lund University in Sweden. So let's welcome to the show, Randy Kritkausky.
I appreciate your welcoming me on the air.
Oh my goodness, what an honor it is to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book. And I have to ask you, what inspired you to write this book?
Multiple things inspired me. Initially, it was my effort to come to terms with experiences that were happening rather spontaneously, and my wonder and sometimes perplexity at what it all meant. So I started keeping something like a diary, just for myself. And then as time went on, and people asked me what I was doing of late, I would mention what I was writing about, and their eyes would get very large, and they would get very relaxed and very interested, and they wanted to know more. The thought occurred to me that maybe I need to share the experience. So eventually, a diary turned into something like a memoir, an essay, and then I found a publisher, and as of today, it has become a book.
It's such a journey from writing a book, the inspiration to where it is today. And so, can you elaborate a little bit on the title of your book, Without Reservation? What led you to name your book that?
Well, first of all, it's a play on words. Without Reservation refers to my status as a legally enrolled tribal member of the Potawatomi, the Citizens Potawatomi Nation, which is now located in the Shawnee, Oklahoma area. And I didn't grow up on the reservation. I grew up without that reservation experience, not within, but without. So that's the one meaning of the word. And then as I came to terms with that word, I realized that I also was engaging and welcoming these new experiences without reservation, without hesitation. So it works just wonderfully on two different levels.
So what were some of the experiences that you were having that, kind of propelled everything forward?
Well, it was quite a range. Here in Vermont, we live in a forest. It's a wonderful place to be at this particular moment in the nation's and the world's history. You are naturally self-isolated. And 6 months a year, we sleep in a screened-in porch, and we hear all of the wild creatures in the forest. And as began to happen 3.5 years ago, when my mother took up residence with us because she'd had a stroke, at night, the oddest things would happen. For example, I would be awakened by a single firefly. And it wasn't the light, the blinking green light of this wonderful creature. It was something akin to a sound or a beckoning. And I would wake up and there would be a giant firefly like I'd never seen before on the screen. And then as I awakened, I would hear an owl, for example, which in our Potawatomi language is ku-ku-o-ku. The sound of the owl is very similar to that. It's cuckoo. And I felt like the owl was talking to me and had something to say. Eventually, I was comfortable enough to go out on the porch and call back to the owls. And I found that they responded to me. So I wondered what was going on. I had once seen a film called The Owl Calls My Name about someone who was dying, and the owl called this person's name before his death. And I thought, oh my God, this means my mother's going to die after, a first stroke. So I wrote to elders in the tribe who are more familiar with these things, and I said, is this something natural for Native Americans to experience? And that's when the explanations and the feedback from my own culture came to me and helped me to frame these experiences, which I now call visitations.
It seems that, especially now, being so connected and so close to nature, I mean, this is something, no wonder when you're explaining this to people, their eyes are getting wide, they're having this, just relaxed feeling, because it feels like people are just longing for that reconnection with Mother Earth.
Yes. I had no idea how timely the book would be as I was writing it. I've been an environmentalist all my life. I've worked internationally on incredible problems, the Chernobyl nuclear accident and Russian factory pollution and desertification in China. But I'd never really worked on the other end of environmental issues, which is getting people more deeply connected to the nature in their own backyards or in their neighborhood. And now, as you said, gardening is exploding. People are digging up every square inch of their yards and planting gardens. But more importantly, I think people are feeling a desperate need to connect to something. Being socially isolated, the question becomes, so what can I relate to that isn't going to harm me? And Mother Earth is there engaging and welcoming, and because of problems like climate change, also beckoning us to connect so that we can heal together. And if ever there were a theme that were timely, it's healing together.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I think you're the perfect person to bring this message in, because both as being an outsider and an individual who's enrolled as a tribal member, you have both feet in both worlds, So how does that play a role in your life as it is today?
Oh, thank you for that characterization. That's actually the sort of main message that I want to convey at this point in time. Because I am not an enrolled member of the nation, and when people see me, as the first sentences of my book make very clear, they probably react saying, my God, he doesn't look like an Indian. He looks like a Scandinavian. In a sense, I see myself as a bridge builder. If I looked like a classic Indian, which for many people, unfortunately, is based on Hollywood movies, the 1950s and 60s when Italians played Indians. Nevertheless, I don't meet any of those stereotypes. And because I am not that kind of distancing, romanticized visual image of a Native American, I feel I might be a little bit more accessible and a little bit less subject to being romanticized or mystified. I think one of the tragedies of Native Americans is that while people want to understand more and want to engage, they tend to put Native Americans on a distant pedestal saying, wow, that's a great experience. They have that experience, but we can't because we're not Indian. And as I write in my book, my connection with my ancestors, or reconnection with my ancestors, is not just with my Native American ancestors. It's also with my French fur trapper ancestor who married into the Native American tribe some 5 generations ago. So I believe that all of us have this potential to reconnect. I think it happens in a different vocabulary and a different framework for each of us. We just need to find that path.
Yeah, isn't that the truth? But, being who you are, I think it helps a lot of people also who are going through this periods of isolation or maybe feeling like they don't fit in anywhere, being able to reconnect with nature and finding their own path. And really, in many ways, understanding and awakening how your subtitles awaken to Native American spirituality. and the ways of our ancestors, it's really kind of understanding that and having a deeper approach to spirituality.
Indeed, indeed.
So, and I know you talked about some of the work that you've done, like with Chernobyl. That must have been heartbreaking to be someone who is seeing this devastation to the planet, and then coming back. How was that for you?
At the time we were working there, I was not having these more Native American-like experiences, but it was traumatic. The great irony is we went there just years after the accident. You weren't supposed to be visiting, but we had an office in Belarus and we had projects funded to try to understand the impact. And the Chernobyl reactor was surrounded by 3 rings of giant fences. And it actually was one of the most quiet and beautiful nature parks I'd ever been in, especially when you got into the final, most dangerous inner ring. The animals didn't see humans. They were completely comfortable being around humans. So a nuclear accident had evacuated humans, much like we're reading about today in some way, shutting down industrial society, and allowed nature in some ways to reassert itself. So in a sense, I guess that experience planted the seeds of wonder. What would the planet be like? What would the life on the planet be like if we had a little less heavy footprint, if we let nature have a little more of an upper hand? And how ironic that a nuclear accident would have to deliver that message.
Well, and I can see, probably looking back, how maybe your thoughts have really maybe progressed or changed, from also looking at that accident and the totality of everything from an indigenous perspective.
Yes, for many decades, we funded projects all over the world, and we were very much firm believers that science and scientific monitoring equipment and good policy would get us to where we need to get to and solve the world's environmental problems. Of course, what we're finding out is that those are pathways and vehicles to problem solving, but scientific argument and information and more monitoring equipment, more technology isn't really getting us where we need to get fast enough. What's missing, I have discovered in recent years, is something internal, something spiritual, and that is our willingness to be a bit more humble about our role on the planet and our role in ecosystems, and not to take such a heavy hand trying to engineer everything, and to listen a little more carefully to what Mother Earth is trying so desperately to show us, and then to begin healing together. And many people with COVID and climate change and the fires in California and the hurricanes are saying, oh, Mother Nature is angry and is punishing us. Mother Nature doesn't punish us. We punish ourselves. And all we need to do is look to Mother Nature to find the ways of healing together. And I think this is the moment for it.
In many ways, just like Chernobyl, eventually there's that balance that comes back, when we stop messing with things,
Nature is more resilient than we often realize. I realize the newspapers are full of daily stories about one more species becoming extinct and how many are endangered. I mean, this is a reality. I don't deny it. But when people ask me, how are we going to survive climate change? I say, well, once again, my Native American history has a lesson here. My tribe originally lived in the woodland. The woodland is now Chicago. It was literally the Chicago waterfront. Chicago is a Potawatomi word. And we were forced off that land at gunpoint, marched to Kansas, and lived in the prairie, which was quite a sudden climate change. No woods, no forests, no water, the prairie. And then shortly thereafter, we were marched to the deserts of Oklahoma, where we are today. That's a generation and a half of the most extraordinary climate change, greater than anything anyone in the world is anticipating today. We survived. It was not beautiful. Many died. Much was lost along the way. But humans do find ways of muddling through. I hope we don't have to go through that kind of agony and loss of life, but we're a much, much more resilient species than sometimes we fear we are.
Yes, I hope humankind has learned from these, from our past, and we don't repeat these same mistakes where we're hurting other people in the way that's happened in the past. It's just heartbreaking. So I know that you talk in your book about you had a lesson from a Coy-Wolf. Why don't you share with our listeners a little bit about that?
It's actually one of my favorite stories, and it goes back to one of the first questions you asked about my hybrid identity. Here in Vermont, we have the forest and the meadows occupied by a hybrid. It is approximately half coyote and half wolf. And they appeared in this part of the country a few decades ago. It turns out that the Coy-Wolf is the result of interbreeding around the turn of the 20th century of coyotes and gray wolves in Ontario province. DNA analysis is doing wonderful things, establishing the family tree of these animals. So one night when we were watching a video on Native American history, it was talking about experiences that had happened in my family, like my grandfather going to an Indian school, and it was just too painful to watch. We had to turn it off, and we came downstairs where I'm sitting literally right this minute and decided we'd play cards and try to get our minds off of this, agonizing chapter in human history. And all of a sudden I heard this howl outside. It's a wolf-like howl. And I looked at Carol and I said, my gosh, what is that? They don't usually come so close to the house. And it went on and on and on. And it really shook me. It felt, again, like, messengers. But I didn't know what the messenger was. So I went to sleep. And in the middle of the night, which is often the case when I write, I woke up and I started thinking about the Coy-Wolf. And it suddenly hit me. Coy-Wolf was bringing me a message. And the message was, Randy, like you, I'm not pure coyote. I'm not pure wolf. I'm a hybrid. And because I'm a hybrid, I'm more adaptable. And I went and got a videotape, wonderful, one of those nature programs on television, looking at the survivability of the coyote and its adaptability. And all of the naturalists were in awe at this creature and how it can live in New York City, as well as in Vermont. And it has the ability to eat berries and small plants, which the wolf didn't. And it has the jaws of the wolf because it's a hybrid, so it can eat larger game, which the coyote couldn't. So I keep returning to this wonderful creature. It's almost like a totemic, creature identity for me. And I like to think of myself as, having a particularly intimate connection with this other hybrid. And what can I say? I mean, our whole society is made up of people who are biologically hybrids, of multiracial, multi-ethnic backgrounds. And we're not less for it. We're all more for it if we can develop that appreciation.
Well, you can see where this deep connection is for you. As you talk about being a hybrid, why did this dimension of being Indigenous touch you so deeply?
Well, in part, because it was unexpected. I'm entering my 8th decade. I finished my 7th recently. And for 90% of my life, I knew we had Indian ancestry. My parents had enrolled us as tribal members, and every now and then we'd talk about it. But I really neglected it. And it just came roaring out of the forest. I think I write in my book that it was, at first it was not a very quiet kind of awakening. I think I said that it was, like a SWAT team coming up the driveway with, sirens blaring and breaking down the door, one of those interventions in a family where you have someone who's addicted to something and, you have to, heavy-handedly sit them down and confront them. And I felt like, my ancestors and the kin in the forest were suddenly saying, hey, okay, come on, it's time to sit down. We got to have a chat here. We've been sending you subtle messages and you're not getting it. Wake up. Got pretty intense. And there were times it was truly, I won't say frightening, but beyond perplexing. And there are times when I really wondered, if I'm losing my mind. And thank God I have access to elders, who would affirm to me that no, what you're experiencing is like the quintessential Native American awakening and spiritual experience. And that's when I learned to stop fearing it and just put my arms around it and welcome it. And now it's nearly a daily occurrence, if not more than once a day, that some kind of visitation or insight descends upon me, and I welcome it.
Well, I'm so glad you wrote this book, because it really gives a roadmap for many people to look at spirituality in a new way and to look at themselves in a new way. How have you said, if you talk to, the Native American, audience, what do they say about your writing about this book?
I'm just beginning to do that. I'll soon have a Zoom conference call with a group of tribal members. It's going to be published in my tribal newspaper. But while I was writing the book and had drafts of it, I would go and visit powwows and strike up conversations with people. Very usually, often, with people like myself, who hadn't been on the reservation. And they would just break down in tears and say, my grandmother never enrolled us. I can't prove I'm an Indian, but I know we are. And oh my gosh, I need to talk to somebody about this. Here in Vermont, the Abenaki, which is the indigenous tribe that occupied this area, they all destroyed their family tree records because we had at the beginning of the 20th century a eugenics program, just literally a few miles from where I'm sitting, where Native American women and French Catholics were taken to be sterilized because the population at the turn of the 20th century in enlightened Vermont didn't want more indigenous people, and they didn't want more Catholics in a state that they feared was ceasing to become white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. So a lot of us, for different reasons, all of them sad stories, have lost contact with our past. And I'm hoping that tribal members, including those who live on reservations, will see what I'm offering as an opportunity for all of us, on and without the reservation, to re-engage with our heritage and re-engage with our ancestors and Mother Nature.
Is that one of the reasons why there's very little written about, spiritual life of Native Americans that, within the 21st century?
Well, that is my impression. And whenever I hear someone express that, someone jumps up and down and says, no, there's this vast literature, and they start enumerating it. And I have to keep pointing out that an awful lot of it is academic. It deals with spiritual issues, but in a very academic framework, which is sometimes not easily accessible. Or the spiritual experience is about the sort of negative side of being a Native American, the sense of victimhood, the sense of loss, the sense of, alcohol and drug abuse on a reservation. And I think while the literature is out there, both the fiction and the nonfiction is not always appealing to the mainstream reader who picks it up and says, I don't want to read another sad story. I don't want to read another, gloomy story of dysfunctional families in this time and place. So I really have to say I support your perception, And I think all of us in the Native American community need to be more attuned to the need and the desire to connect in a different way with who we are.
Yeah, I think people are they need that now more than ever. And that's one of the things that I took away from your book is just how we can have that reconnection, in many ways, for people, that awakening.
That would be my fondest hope. And in a year or two, perhaps I'll know. I have to say that because of my publisher, I'm meeting people from the community of which you are a part, people who have these wonderful talk shows, making spirituality accessible and permissible. Because I grew up in a world and a culture, an intellectual university culture where, quite frankly, you didn't talk about these kinds of things. Academics keep telling me, I can't write about this. I have your experience, Randy, but if I write about it, my career's over. So I have to thank, all of you who do this kind of work. And you're the most wonderfully welcoming, inclusive community. It's been another kind of visitation, via Zoom and Skype and the radio. I'm deeply grateful. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. Thank you. I mean, without your input and knowledge and experience that you bring, I think it leaves many doors closed. And we're in this great age where we can have these open discussions, and we would do it regardless if we could or not, but we could have these open discussions about spirituality and really look at it in a new way. And I think your book, Without Reservations, really opens the door for people that maybe feel that they don't have a community, or are not connected to nature, and how to really kind of develop that.
That's my fondest dream. If that happens, I'll be very, very, very happy.
Yeah, good dreams to have. Well, Randy, where can our listeners connect with you and be part of your community and learn more about the work you do?
Well, I have a website. It's off to a humble start, and I've put up links to interviews like the one you're doing, which I'm hoping will help. I've also tried to explain why I wrote the book. I continue to write, and I put up brief commentaries. So, if anybody wants to look at my website, it's, www.randy-kirtkausky.com. That's a good place. People can write to me, and of course they can read the book,
which is available everywhere. Well, Randy, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Thanks for the invitation, or as we say in Potawatomi, miigwech.
Well, thank you, Randy. It has been such an honor to spend this time with you, and of course to talk about your new book, Without Reservation: Awakening to Native American Spirituality and the Way of Our Ancestors. Without Reservations available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all indie retailers. And if you don't see it on the shelf, ask for them to order it. And of course, it's available on Kindle. Again, if you'd like to connect with Randy, you can at randy-kirtkowski.com for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You're listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Sunday, Monday, Thursday, and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.